everyone get the warm welcome to Darryl O'Bryan.
Good morning. I'm here. Okay. So, I guess the first thing we have to touch on is the disclaimer. So the views and opinions expressed by the following presenters does not necessarily reflect those of this organisation or our affiliates. The information should not be taken as legal advice. It is for discussion purposes only. Participants are advised to undertake their own research. So this is a presentation that was put together by a conveyancer in Victoria, and they kindly lent me this presentation because I felt it was a very good way of bringing you up to speed on what your land title actually means, a bit of history behind it, and helps you better understand how to deal with your title, how to manage that title, and in particular, because we've got a single registry set up in each state to maintain and secure those titles, we need to better understand what their role is and a bit of history that allows us then to better manage as proprietors to that title, because believe me, at the moment, you're losing them. So as a licensed conveyancer in Victoria, over 25 years in the property and conveyancing industry, I've run and operated my own conveyancing practice in the outer east of Melbourne since 2009. The Victorian government intends to take control of all paper titles. This has already been done in other states, and in fact, Queensland is where this started. So in Victoria, we currently have an option to obtain a paper title. Once abolished, and it is in the process, the Victorian government can and are taking control of your title. Bit of history. Crown land is held by the government. Selection of Crown land began in Victoria in 1860. Once the land had been sold, alienated, it passes to private ownership. Land that has not been alienated remains Crown land. Freehold land is that has been alienated from the Crown, sold by the government and granted to an individual or other entity. Under the general law system, land ownership was based on a set of deeds which trace the history of ownership. Title was proven by producing the collection of deeds which has been held by successive owners. Eventually, all land held by the person now appearing to be the owner. Every time land changed hands, the chain of deeds needed to be produced and new transfer deed needed to be drawn up by the lawyers. This process added to the record of deeds, which was kept by the owner, resulting in an ever-increasing collection of ownership documentations. Of course, this system was at risk of deeds being lost or destroyed. So land ownership in the general law system was not and is not guaranteed by the state governments. A system of recording and registering land ownership was introduced in Victoria under the Real Property Act 1862 and subsequently the Transfer of Land Act 1958. This was known as the Torrens System. Its purpose was to introduce and maintain a single register of information about land in private ownership, freehold land. Under this system, the state government took control of land registration and guaranteed title ownership in the Torrens Land Register, historically known as the Register Book. The Torrens System, with its one title and government guarantee, created an original title, which was held securely and permanently in the land register. And a duplicate title was then issued to the owner. Any successive land transactions on title needed to be lodged at the titles office for registration of the transaction. The Registrar of Titles, under the provisions of Section 5, subsection 1 of the Transfer of Land Act 1958, is responsible for registration and management of land titles in Victoria under that system. Land titles in paper format were not digitally converted and updated by endorsement on the paper land titles through the registration of land register transaction up until 2002. The endorsement of paper land titles ceased with the introduction of the Victorian online title system in 2002, VOTS. So then in 2013, they started introducing electronic conveyancing. Electronic conveyancing was not well received so the Victorian government mandated it in October 2018. So that's when they started ignoring the will of the people. So as a conveyancer, they had no option but to use a platform known as the Property Exchange Australia, Pexa, which is a private commercial enterprise created to facilitate electronic transfer of titles and other title dealings in Victoria and other states. There is currently no competitor, and Pexa is the only electronic lodgement network operator in Australia. At inception, Pexa was owned by the 4 major banks. Does that make you feel comfortable? The land registries of West Australia, New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland, as well as some larger private investors. So the ARNECC is a regulatory authority that is run by the registrars of each state and territory. The electronic conveyancing national law, the ECNL, governs the provisioning and operation of electronic conveyancing in Australia. It is implemented by separate legislation in each state and territory. With only one ELNO in operation, Pexa basically has control of the market with little accountability to consumers, not to mention the clear conflict between Pexa and the entities that govern it. So when electronic conveyancing was introduced, the Victorian government converted all paper titles held by the big 4 banks into electronic titles. In turn, the banks were ordered to destroy the paper titles that they held. This conversion then moved into smaller lenders, which over time, and currently about 60% of titles, are in electronic form. A virtual document located in the cloud. Geez, how comfortable are we now? How well has that cloud been working for us in the past? Safe and secure. Nothing like a digital in the cloud, basically just dots in the cloud. Currently, as a conveyancer, I can request a paper title if unencumbered. In 21, consultation was undertaken by the Titles Office to determine the future management of the remaining paper titles. The consultation only engaged stakeholders, such as solicitors and conveyancers. Consumers were not consulted. So the consultation paper can be found at that link. So what can you do? So if you're in Victoria, there is still time to let the Registrar of Titles and the Planning Minister know that you are not happy with their intent to take control of any title you control, be it now or even in the future. This should matter whether you own a home or not. It's going to affect every one of us. And you can email addresses there. So we have a problem. We have a problem. And what's the first thing that sort of stands out to you from what I've just presented? Well, the failure of any form of consultation with you, the proprietor to that property.
But also getting rid of the titles without your consent.
Yeah, I'll cover this in my next presentation. But essentially, this conversion is they're breaking the law.
The conveyancer breaking the law?
No. The conveyancers hasn't been given much choice.
So were doctors with the vaccination?
True. So, as we learned through the health debacle of the last 3 years, we were all confronted with powers exercised to the point where they were regulating, the government was regulating the patient. Governments don't have that authority. They can only regulate the service providers. There is no power in the English law system of governance to regulate the patient. So why, and if I went right through this paper, the reason comes out, according to the government, as to why they're doing this conversion from paper to digital. And that reason is so they can save paper. Serious. It's in black and white. We're saving paper. Because just in Victoria, we've got something like 3.3 million titles. So they felt, those properties turn over fairly regularly, and it chews through so many 1,000 kilos of paper. So they figured, no, there's a better way. That's their excuse. This is their excuse. It's not the reality, but it is the excuse they're using. Sad, but so true. A land title in fee simple. We heard of that term? Good. So can the State Registry convert your title? Landowner's status. So in a legal sense, from the beginning, and when I say the beginning, I mean the Statute of Qua Emptors, 1290, which was the legislation brought in under Edward I, establishing freehold title, estates in fee simple. You are the proprietor. It's an important word, and we need to maintain that in our psyche when we're dealing with titles. So this offers the description of, essentially, it goes hand in hand with freehold landowners' identification, a word that we use today. And that coat of arms and the seal that each title holder had was a requirement in order to have the land recognised by the king and allowing that land to go onto the king's ledger. It's a financial ledger that the king required for the purposes of funding his treasury. So the value of the land and also the capacity that land exposed with respect to its ability to earn over a 12-month period, that was all added to the value of that land. And the king would put on the coat of arms and the seal the imperial crown. So that was an indication that land fell within the king's treasury and the king's land title system. Through the Nemo dat quod non bebet. No man can give better title than himself, and this is the basis of your identification within that land title, which becomes a right in rem, and rem being property, through an inquiry for equitable ascertainment under the Articles of Heir, and not of War. So the Articles of Heir brought in the customary rights. And these are customary rights that you express as a proprietor. And this is separate, so we're separating ourselves from the system that we are under today. But it's important that we understand this, because this is the sort of form of identification that applies to the living, not the probate system that we're under today. Owner. So proprietary rights are those rights which an owner of property has by virtue of ownership. Proprietary rights includes accordance and satisfaction of the doctrine of season. So have we heard of that term? Very important, an extremely important word. To set and to sit in quiet enjoyment. This comes through the Statute of Uses, 1536. The statute ended the practice of uses in real property by changing the purely equitable title of beneficiaries of a use to absolute ownership with a right of season, a right of quiet enjoyment. Right? No one can enter your property and take away that right of enjoyment, or no one can bring about changes to your property which takes away your right to quiet enjoyment. Not even the king or the king's men. Okay? This is a protection in order to maintain your mental integrity and your ability to, in quiet enjoyment, raise a family. It's all very important. This is why that word is something we need to instill firmly within our psyche as proprietors to land. Because any form of invasion on our land is a breach of that quiet enjoyment. And this has been dealt with many times over the hundreds of years in the courts, right up until recently even here in Australia. Season is the key. The statute was conceived by Henry VIII of England as a way to rectify his financial problems by simplifying the law of uses, which moved land outside the royal tax revenue through royal fees called feudal incidents, traditionally imposed through season. At the time, land could not be passed by a will, and when it devolved to the heir upon death, was subject to taxes. Hence, the practice evolved of landowners creating a use of the land to enable it to pass to someone other than their legal heir upon their death, or simply to try and reduce the incidence of taxation. So the land certificate was a document issued by the land registry to the proprietor of registered land as proof of his ownership of it. So it's one who owns land. In the case of registered law, the registered land, the registered proprietor, is the person entitled to the legal estate and is recorded as such in the proprietorship register. As far as dealing with title deeds, those documents, and this is very important, these documents are not chattels. You know what a chattel is? It's an attachment to the land. It's not a chattel. Title deed is so closely connected with the land that they will pass on a conveyance of the land without being expressly mentioned. It is to be considered part of the land. The property passes out of the vendor to the purchaser simply by the grant of the land itself. As a rule, the estate owner, proprietor, is entitled to possession of the documents relating to the owner's title. So this is important. That document is as much a part of the land as the soil and the grass and everything that makes up that land. Then if, as we've seen in the past 20-odd years, governments have made changes to your land without your consent. All right? This is important. This is really the crux of this ownership and what that title essentially means to that land and to you, the proprietor. It is just so important. And this is a court case in 1930 which dealt with this. So, what are the offences? And there are. So, in the Land Property Act in the United Kingdom, 1926, it states very clearly that anyone who within the office, that single registry office, who makes any changes to that document without the consent of the proprietor is committing a criminal offence. It's called larceny. It's all, the modern word for that is theft. We can also tie in fraud. And the fraud is reflected through the ownership at the moment of each one of those single registries here in Australia being Pexa. Because all of these land deeds are granted through the Crown. And in each state, in your Property Law Act, you will find a section, and I know in Queensland it's section 20, which clearly states that any fees payable against that property, the beneficiary must be the Crown. So Pexa, we need to assume at the moment, is not an agent of the Crown. It's fairly obvious. But as landowners, we need to start asking these questions. Yes, there is law that says that anyone involved at a clerical level who make changes without the consent can look forward to 10 years in prison. But we need to be proactive and we need to ask these people, we need to involve our planning minister in each state, and we need to say, hang on, what's going on? We need to, if we're lucky enough to have a paper copy of the original document in our possession, then we make an application to the Registry of Land Titles and we ask them for a copy of the electronic version, the one that currently sits there. And then we just do a simple comparison. And if we see changes, and this is what we've found in each state, in Victoria, they've taken away the word, instead of the phrase describing the land as estate in fee simple, it's now estate fee simple. And that's different. It's got a different legal meaning. So, under the Crimes Act, and this is probably the most accurate of every state, and believe me, every state has been trying to modify this law. We bring about larceny, receiving, or larceny and receiving under section 121. Fairly straightforward. 156, larceny by clerks or servants. Larceny by clerks or servants, whoever being a clerk or servant steals any property belonging to or in the possession of power or power of his or her master or employer, or any property into or for which it has been converted or exchanged, shall be liable to imprisonment for 10 years. Section 157 also covers embezzlement. But in each state, you should have an equivalent of this law. In Victoria, it's under what's called the Crimes Theft Act 1973. So only estates in land which are capable of subsisting or being created or conveyed at law are an estate in fee simple, absolute in possession, and a term of years absolute. Okay? So other estates, interests and charges in and over land shall take effect as equitable interests. So once a property is mortgaged, it slips from being an estate in fee simple to an other estate. So then interests and charges can accordingly be applied. So then when they take a word, when they adjust that phrase estate in fee simple, they then make the estate vulnerable to taxes and all of these extra charges. So this is why it's important. And we've actually been corresponding with the Land Registry in Victoria, and they just say, oh, no, it still means the same thing. No, mate, no, it doesn't. It's a different meaning. And then this is straight out of an English law dictionary called Jowett's. It's probably one of the most powerful books of authority used in England. Fee was applied to property to denote that it had a quality of descending to the heirs of the owner for the time being, if the owner did not dispose of it during the life of the owner. Thus, an office or annuity in fee is one which descends to the heir on the owner's death intestate. The term is, however, chiefly of importance as applied to land, estates of inheritance in land being called estates in fee. Estate in fee simple is another form of estate vulnerable to be determined by condition applied as an equitable interest. Condition could be, according to law, imposing interest and charges in or over land. Under the Conveyancing and Law of Property Act 1881, Section 51, it has been decided in England that the exact statutory phrase must be in fee. Is not enough. The word simple is added by the court to the habendum of a disentailing deed. And this comes out in another case. Proprietor. So where there is a reference on the current title to the proprietor, there is a discrepancy. This is one of the changes that they've been making, probably the most insidious of all the changes. They are now referring and putting your name in all capitals. So we've been seeing, I guess, they've been getting us used to this concept of, you know, when we receive a fine or some, mainly from government or government subcontractors, our name is in all capital letters. Now, when I first started walking down this path of law, some 22 years ago, one of the first books that I took under my belt was called the Styles Manual. So anyone that is a CEO of a corporation or they run any sort of administration as work, the Styles Manual is essentially your Bible for administration and how to conduct administration within the Commonwealth. And nowhere in that Styles Manual do I see any sort of permission to have the all capitals version of a name. So when I see that on our title deeds, one then has to start going, hang on, this is foreign. This isn't within the Commonwealth of Australia. This isn't under the United Kingdom. This isn't part of that grant from the Crown. Cannot be. Because that Styles Manual originally came through the Commonwealth. Of course, there are other Styles Manuals, and those Styles Manuals come through Geneva, and they're under the Roman system. So what is that uppercase name? What is it in law? And in law, it's called Capitis Diminutio Maxima. And this comes straight out of Black's Law Dictionary, which is US Law Dictionary. In Roman law, Roman law, I didn't think that the Commonwealth was bound under Roman law. It's a diminishing or abridgment of personality, a loss or curtailment of a man's status or aggregate of legal attributes and qualifications, following upon certain changes in his civil condition. The highest or most comprehensive loss of status. This occurred when a man's condition was changed from one of freedom to one of bondage, when he became a slave. It swept away with it all rights of citizenship and all family rights. So technically, you cannot have an all capitals name on a Crown originated title deed, because that coat of arms, which was a requirement under the King, that coat of arms was an indication of your heraldry, your family line. And what they're doing now is they're destroying that just by putting that name in all capitals. And this should be ringing, to me, having studied this and knowing this for many years, it's just alarm bells. This is the weakness they have But because you, the predominantly most people, have no idea in Australia of what I've just shown you on the board, this is the key to undoing what the Titles Office is now doing to our property titles. So, who's behind this? It says Roman law very clearly there. So, who is actually behind this? Let's have a look. Has anyone seen the Pope's great audience hall? So it was Paul VI, and it was his audience hall, also known as the Hall of the Pontifical Audiences. It's a building in Rome named for Pope Paul VI with a seating capacity of 6,300. Designed by the Italian architect Pier Luigi Nevi and completed in 1971. It was constructed on land donated by the Knights of Columbus. It lies partly in Vatican City, but mostly in Italy, with the Italian part of the building as being treated as an extraterritorial area of the Holy See, and is used by the Pope as an alternative to St. Peter's Square when conducting his Wednesday morning general audience. So have we all seen an image of this hall? Well, there it is. So what's it look like to you? What's it look like? You can't hide this. It's in your face, isn't it? So, where is the barrier in law to this foreign power? And it comes through what's called the Bill of Rights. Yes, we have a Bill of Rights. And that Bill of Rights very clearly spells out, and this is a Bill of Rights in order to protect the rights and liberties of the subject, settling the succession of the crown. So whereas the Lord's spiritual, temporal and commons, now spiritual and temporal is essentially the qualification that one needs in order to be in government. And when they say temporal, they mean that in order to qualify as a judge, or in order to qualify in a particular position within government in the United Kingdom, you have to have a certain level of, it's going to sound a bit crazy, but this is just what it is, ringing in your ears. And it's called the buzzing of the bees. This is how people were tested back then in order to bring about a trust in the community. And this was they were calling it a gift from the Creator. So these people were essentially tested and put in these positions of trust and power within government because they had this particular sound in their ears. We call it tinnitus today. But I'm just giving you the history. Assembled at Westminster lawfully and fully and freely representing all the estates of the people of this realm. Okay, there it is. Presenting all of the estates of the people of this realm. Did upon the 13th day of February in the year of our Lord 1688, present unto their majesties, then called and known by the names and style of William and Mary, Prince and Princess of Orange, being present in their proper persons, a certain declaration in writing made by the said Lords and Commons in the words following. And then it spells out the 13 sections of the Bill of Rights, and this was a direct instruction to those in the executive, the parliamentary and the judicial arms of governance within the United Kingdom in order to protect the subjects' liberties and rights. These 13 sections were laid out. Now, Section 9, or Article 9 of the Bill of Rights, sets up parliamentary privilege. And this is cited today in an exercise by every parliament throughout Australia. And the federal parliament comes under what's called the Parliamentary Privileges Act 1987. It cites the Bill of Rights, specifically this. Article 12 of the Bill of Rights very clearly says that all grants and promises of fines and forfeitures to particular persons before conviction is illegal and void. So, can we think of a situation where that's been breached? Like maybe a police officer pulling you over and giving you an infringement notice? Hang on, where's the conviction before you issue a fine? Don't forget, promises of fines. Section 13 goes into far more detail. And part of that detail is the oath. So everyone who operates in government anywhere within the realm of the Commonwealth is required to take this oath. And that they are to have no allegiance at all for the protection of their subjects to the Pope or the See of Rome.
That's everyone out there.
Yep. So there's the entity that's essentially taken over our titles office and our governance. There's only two jurisdictions on this planet. There's the Holy See and there's the Commonwealth. And this referendum that we're confronting on the 14th of October will allow the complete takeover of the Commonwealth by the Holy See. In Canberra today, there is an embassy for the Holy See. It's been there since 1973. Why haven't we been shown this stuff a long time ago? This is very important stuff. Now, funnily enough, that Bill of Rights has got High Court precedents as recent as 2010. And it's Port of Portland versus State of Victoria. And it was a full bench of the High Court. All 7 justices stood behind that Bill of Rights, enforcing that upon all those who operate in governance anywhere in this country. Is it being adhered to? No. Why? Because you don't know this stuff. Because you're the highest authority. So this sort of brings us to Cohaddon. And those who've been listening to the Know Your Rights radio show, I've been talking about Cohaddon as a place to bring land titles to away from this Pexa Roman system and bring it into a secure system under the Torrens granted system of a single registry or registries for the purposes of re-establishing a Crown body of law. But unfortunately, Cohaddon has not been completed in its establishment within the King's Court. Yes, there was a statute created under Edward I, which first set up and granted in perpetuity letters patent in 1283, establishing Cohaddon as an office of the Crown. But since 1283, it has laid down and gone for a sleep. And when that occurs, the only way to bring that office back into life and back into the King's Court is through what's called a ton. It has to achieve a ton of land titles. It has to create a ledger, and that ton is spelt T-U-N. It means 100 land titles have to appear on a newly created ledger, and then the King, it alerts the King and the House of Lords as to, okay, this office is back up and running, and the constable to that office, that Crown grant, has to establish and re-establish himself in the King's Court. Now, there was a gentleman by the name of Geoffrey Foley who is making claim to that office of constable. And that's one of the first steps that has to be taken, is he has to, as the office of constable, is a fairly important office. When you look at the original statute created in 1283, the constable's role was to secure and maintain the King's treasury. So it was a fairly important role. Now, unfortunately, Jeff, he approached myself back in about 2004, and I was in an office called the Principality of Caledonia. There's another whole story there, but I won't go into it. And he requested that we assist him in establishing his inheritance that he was claiming as the constable to Cohaddon. So we helped him do some paperwork that was sent out around the world to all the powers that be, and he needed then to follow up on that, which he was encouraged to do. There was a gentleman that came in and assisted him financially to get over to England and establish himself not only within Wales, which is where this inheritance came through, there's Pembrokeshire, and there is a castle. He basically just went over there for a holiday, and he did not fulfil his requirements under law. So Cohaddon is not capable of operating its letters patent until such time as the constable has established himself. Now I was the public promotion of Cohaddon, and I was under I was told that this was all done. Well, it hasn't been. I've done some further investigation, and it hasn't been. But this doesn't deter from you, proprietors of your estates in fee simple, from being proactive. And what I'm encouraging all land title owners to do is to start communicating with your planning minister, with the Registrar General of your state registry of land titles, and hopefully through my presentation you're now a little bit more educated, and you should be able to ask some very awkward questions of both the Planning Minister and the Registrar General. You are now aware that that title forms as much a part of that land as anything that grows on it. It's part of that land, and as such, any changes made to that title must have been with your consent. So could the Planning Minister or the Registrar General please provide evidence that you have consented to this change to an electronic title? And could they forward that evidence to you as soon as possible? Now, we know what they're going to say, because as I pointed out in that first PDF, they've done all of this without your consent. And that is, they have broken the law. This is a criminal offence. Now, I don't expect everyone to start filing charges against the clerks and the like within this system. And believe me, if Corhaddon had have been a fully operational Crown entity, the sheer logistics of taking on people's titles is an absolute nightmare. So we have a system already in place. We just need, as the proprietors to all of these titles, we need to be more proactive and start asking these awkward questions and putting these people back in their place. Currently it's with the big four banks, and it's sitting up in the cloud. We know that's not very secure. So we want our security back. We want this system, we require this system to go back under that safety net of the Crown. We ask them, where in law have they got the capacity to put our name in all capitals? Where in the Styles Manual of the Commonwealth have they got permission as administrators to make these fundamental changes, putting us into a foreign jurisdiction? These are the questions we need to start asking of those who are securing our titles. The quicker we do this, the quicker we can get back to our quiet enjoyment of our properties, because this is what it's all about, that quiet enjoyment. Any questions? Yes, David.
Hey, Darryl. Hi, Darryl.
How you going, David?
Does it work? Oh, there we go. Yeah, so getting back to the all caps in the type in the electronic form,
Yep.
because the all caps name, and I don't use our all caps name because it's not ours,
That's right.
because the all caps name is now on the title, the electronic title, and the all caps name is property of the state, it's owned by the state, created by the state.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, the title for the homes now is owned by the state. If you own A and A owns B, then if A owns B and B owns C, then A owns C.
And by 2030, you will not have any property and you will be happy.
Was that correct logic? A owns B and B owns C, then A owns C.
Yeah.
So because the state created the all caps name, they own the all caps name, and the all caps name is now on the electronic title, and they own the title.
Yeah, they put it at the time of your birth, when your parents filled out the live birth record, they submit that to the City of London, and they immediately put a copy claim over all derivatives of that name. This is why when we take, and in law, there is nothing stopping you as the proprietor from lifting that volume and folio number off the current registry. So if these people do not perform, the most powerful thing you can do as a proprietor is to say, goodbye, thanks for all the fish, but I'm not interested in the proven criminal behaviour that you have exercised over that title. So I'm now taking that title, and you have the ability to fall back to that chain of titles which existed prior. And in fact, in the Real Property Act 1862, when you do that, you're deemed to be what's called a treasurer solicitor. So you can take control of that title. So you would need to do a statutory declaration, and ideally you would then put that, that statement into public notices in your local or your town's newspaper, because that way it's on the public record. Or you can lift the title, and we are active in the background into another Crown entity. We won't say any more about that, but it is powerful. Another question.
Hi, my name is Diana, and I'm just referring to that last question from the receipt.
Yep.
My understanding, I've just done a little bit of research with Senator Ron Hamilton, and he said as long as you have the original title under the Commonwealth Act title, as long as you have that, it doesn't have to have your name on it, you just need that title, that will protect you. That's what Senator Ron Hamilton has stated. So.
Well, if you remember, as in that first presentation I put up, when they did the conversion from the chain of titles and they set up that single registry, the role of that single registry is to have the original title. That original title, be it in the format of a parchment or paper, it doesn't matter. That must stay at all times with that registry for the purposes of security. When you as the proprietor decide, no, I've had enough, you would do your statutory declaration saying, no, I'm lifting those numbers and I'm taking them elsewhere. So that's within your lawful capacity to do, but as the proprietor, you only get a duplicate of that original title. The original title never leaves the registry office as such until such time as you take it elsewhere. So the question, and if someone's got a mortgage, then the question we must ask also of the registry is why, if there's a caveat placed against that title, why does the bank get a duplicate of the title? Because if I was to put a caveat against someone's property for whatever reason, I don't get a duplicate of that title. I just get a receipt stating that, from the registry, that a caveat has been placed on that property. And then I have an obligation as such to inform, as well as the registry, the proprietor, that there is a caveat that's been placed on the property. So then we need to ask another question. Why and what does the bank do with that duplicate that they're given. I mean, the only other entity that receives a duplicate is the valuer general for the purposes of valuing the property. So then why does the bank take a duplicate? And what are they doing? Are they securitising it? Are they trading it on the New York Stock Exchange? Well, gee, why haven't we, as the proprietor, been made knowledgeable of that? And does that actually fall within the confines of the Crimes Act under fraud? I believe it does. So rather than say to them, you're all a bunch of crims, we get them to admit it through well-structured questions. This is the key. And when we see the evidence come back to us, oh yeah, but we can do this under the Transfer of Land Act or whatever. No, that's not good enough. So now I'm going to act as a treasurer solicitor. I'm going to say, thanks for all the fish, see you later. I'm lifting my volume and folio numbers, and I can keep it in safe and secure within my own premises, right? Ready, if we so choose, to go to a Crown registry, because that's where the grant originally came from. So they're our choices. We have a way out of this. But when, and one of the main reasons, this is what I pointed out at the beginning of this presentation, one of the main reasons that the King granted these titles and was for the purposes of raising bills of exchange through a ledger, an asset ledger. So that land and that title needs to find, essentially, a ledger to go onto for the purposes of raising monies, bills of exchange, so that government can then fund the infrastructure that we all need to operate and go to and from our properties for the purposes of quiet enjoyment. So it works within itself. It's self-perpetuating. Any other questions?
Hi. I just had a question, or have you heard of this safe harbour before? And my other one was, if we don't own our property, then would we be entitled to cure and maintenance?
I haven't heard of the safe harbour. I couldn't comment on that. Security and maintenance to the property, that's predominantly the purposes of services leading up to it. This is where local government essentially has come in, and the subdivision rules and the different portions of land for the purposes of imposing services. This is all part of the rates, or the I can't think of the actual word now. It's a particular rent, rack rent, that local governments have the ability to impose for the purposes of maintenance up to and around that property, including roads. So in 1988, there was a 2 cent, and this was the first fuel levy that was placed, and it was placed by the federal government for the purposes of funding local roads. So anyone that's getting a bill for the curb and channel upgrade out the front of their commercial property or their private property, I would suggest they steer the local government to the federal government and get the money out of the fuel excise that we've been paying.
Darryl, there's a couple more questions that people want to ask, but first there is a woman, Jeanette, who's recently had an experience of lifting her hard copy title, the original duplicate. We have a couple of minutes just to briefly give her experience, because I think it's in everyone's mind. If you want to know, try it on the dog, who has actually managed to do this and how they've done it.
Yep.
Come forward.
Hi, I'm Jeanette. Can I just tell you a little bit of my story? I know everyone's got a story. But just back at the beginning, just so you can see how pissed off I am. I'm quite pissed off I am. My name's Jeanette, and first issue I'll be quick, but the first issue is SA Health. I can't speak to anybody, otherwise I'm in breach of misconduct, which is charging me with anyway, so whatever. So you're all my family, because I can't speak to my family. So my story is I'm a nurse. I've 10 years in the women's prison, and in 2022, what I saw happen to those people in prison, and if we're doing apologies, maybe some people in there need an apology, because the real criminals are walking the streets of Adelaide in suits and uniforms. Anyway, that devastated me. So when 2021 came, October, November, I had to have a job. I said, no, thank you very much. I've been gone. All my annual leave is gone, as everybody else's, but I would, colleagues. No job. I've got no annual leave, I've got no money, I've got no pay. God provided me with a barrister on day one. That was a miracle, because I don't do social media. That was a miracle. So 2 years later, all four chambers are fighting for 150 of us. We've had Nicholas Spurrier in the court system. She's lost all the minutes of when she walked us down, but I'm not to worry. Lost them. Anyway, the judge is ruling me tomorrow on whether we go back to work or not. Many of us don't, because we're mentally scarred by what we saw. So, yes. SA Health paying us, they're paying us to sit at home on our backsides. I'm not quite sure about that, that's like injustice as well. So, I am pissed off. Oh, just 1 minute. Gross misconduct. They're going to do me for gross misconduct. 44 years I've been, I've never done one thing wrong. And yet, if you chop off the wrong arm, chop off the wrong leg, you are done with gross misconduct. Nicholas Spurrier, not gross misconduct. So, I am sick of the lies. Yes, so, that's chapter 1. Chapter 2, my husband worked hard. I'm amazing when he was prison. I got home from a pig to a dog just for being there. But my husband's a mortgage broker. He's sick of the lies that the banks have told him over 40 years. So we have worked hard to pay off some of our properties, small units, as you people here do. So then we went asking, can we have our deeds to the bank? Can we have our deeds? No, can't. So, lie number 2. God intervened just lately with me, because I went to my place at Golden Grove, and a beautiful young woman, who I don't know her name, stood up and said that last Friday before, she went to the deeds titles office and got her deeds. And she said, I cannot understand how people in South Australia are not doing this, because it's so easy. So I thought, listen to what she said. Then, by chance, I went to Port Adelaide, Western Suburbs, my place, and heard the beautiful Len Harris talk. I took some of his notes. Oh, right. Then that led me to Rod Collerton. Oh, right. Then that led me to somebody called Clue, who is absolutely a genius and knows everything about everything. So I spent 2 or 3 sleepless nights writing out my version of the Commonwealth Constitution and all this. Wrote it out, said to my husband, you're coming with me to rein me in. And so last Friday at 2 o'clock, I went to the deeds titles office. Thursday on the reception, I said, I want the Crown Deeds titles. So she goes, no. I said, yes. No, yes. So she said, no, you can't. I need to get the manager. I said, okay, get your manager, thank you. So the manager came out and said, I would like a copy of my Crown Deeds title, please. No. I said, yes. No, yes. oh, you need to take a seat to the side. I said, come on, let's take a seat to the side. So, between me and my husband and my mum and my 3 children, we've got 7 properties between us. Shall I just talk? I've nearly finished it. Yes, yes. It's important. I said to her, why are the banks telling us that they have? Why are the banks telling us that they have destroyed my deeds? Oh, I don't know, she said. I don't think you do. Anyway, to cut a long story short, my life 2 years, I came out with 4 copies of the certificate of titles. She's told me where the originals are stored. She's putting the others in the post to me tomorrow. Yeah, so it's just, I looked at the law and it gave me confidence to know. And I just did drop in the word blasphemy as well.
Thank you so much. I would like to explore this further, I guarantee you. Now, I've got one woman here. Question. I think we'll have a couple more questions, and then we'll have a break for lunch at this point.
Why don't we just all go into the office? Let's all go in there and
All right. Thanks, mate.
I will admit that I'm completely out of my depth today. I'm trying to learn. But when you mentioned about lifting the title onto another Crown entity, I'm just wondering, as a stereotype here, as a woman, security is very important, that your home can't be taken from your farm. You talk about the original, but is there a safe way to have a copy when you do get the original? We just, in the last 12 months, had the family, part of the family farm given to us, and we think it's estate fee simple. We have to look more carefully at that. But is there a secure, if the title burns, yeah, I'm just wondering. I know that sounds like a silly question, but that's not.
No, it's not a silly question at all. Yes, we do need to make sure that once we've lifted that title, and whoever registry, whatever registry it goes over to, that we now place a better form of management over that title. We've learned something today, yes. We've learned more than we knew when we came here today. So that knowledge now should flow through from today and be part of your management of that title. So when it does go over to another Crown registry, and when I say Crown registry, I mean with all of the protections and rights that they have taken us away from, and that original deed will reflect. That's why it's so important to do the comparison between what exists today at that titles office and what it should actually be. So we're now aware that those words estate in fee simple mean a lot. We now know the law that all came from. I urge you to go back and home and get in front of Dr. Google and do the search and have a look at the Statute of Quae Emptors, 1290, and you can read it for yourself. Have a look at the Articles of Heir and start being a good manager. Start being a good proprietor to that property and that deed. Take responsibility for that document, because Australia's in the mess it is because we have been far too complacent with the way we have been governed. And then we need to stop that. We need to get into small groups. Please take this information that you've learned today and carry it through to groups like David is running here in Adelaide and others. Just do comparisons, talk amongst yourselves, build the knowledge. There's so much to learn out there. It is a fascinating field. Law expands into all facets of our lives. No matter where we are or what we do, the law is there with us. And if we have no idea about that law, how vulnerable are we? And I think we've seen a perfect example of that over the past 3 years. And those that are supposed to be governing us are now killing us. We have to wake up to that and stop it. Take control. Get back in charge. Because that's what the law has provided for you here in this country more than any other. Next question.
Two more quick questions.
Woodrow?
Yeah, Woodrow.
The question was provided thousands people in South Australia these days. Not that you have a single home and a title, but so many people are involved with strata, title, in corporate. What collections and properties does that bring about? Are you still a single entity and can blame, or the corporation have votes and play you around?
You fall what's it's called fee tail, and that brings about it's a focus back to that original title, even though it's been strated. And it's even though some states, I know Queensland's made some changes, but fee tail is specifically designed to deal with the smaller stratas and the smaller units, even the apartments that sit, the 20th floor. There is still a portion of equity, because equity must prevail when we've divided up a particular property. So that's important.
Yes, I was sent my, fictitious title from the Land Titles Office under registered proprietor states that I'm just a tenant.
Yeah, tenancy has been granted. This is part of the estate and fee simple, that you have the ability for life, for years, to hand over that property through inheritance or sell it, but essentially it's all Crown land, granted to be freehold. So absolute ownership is what you need to build it up to. You apply separately for absolute ownership. Yes, the meanings that I put up in the presentation steer you to absolute, but you have to look at your state laws relating to the ability of, for instance, a mining company to come in and basically mine at a particular depth below the surface. Once you apply and take possession of your estate in fee simple absolute, yes, then you have control essentially to the centre of the earth. But this has to be something that you do as a tenant to further expand your right to do as you please on that property, but so it does not take away the season of your neighbours, because you have a responsibility to your neighbours. So you don't go building a 20-storey apartment building on your property, because it will take away the quiet enjoyment of your neighbour. Yep. Thank you.
Let's thank Darryl very much. Now, as you can see, this is not over yet. This is just beginning. We're going to have an hour lunch break. We want everyone back here at 1 o'clock sharp.